Hello travelers, Boardman21 here, and today let's discuss my list of the 5 best and worst skills currently in Last Epoch. I've rated these skills based on 3 things. I'm looking at how the skill thematically fits within the class. 2. How the skill synergizes with other skills within that class, and 3. How much eye candy is in the skill tree itself that makes players look at it, want to use it, and come back and use it in different ways. I am not looking at how well a skill performs in terms of damage or its popularity in builds. For an example, Flame Ward will not make the list because it's just used in 99% of all builds and considered mandatory. Alright, let's go ahead and dig into the best 5. Coming in at number 5 to start the list off, we have Summon Skeleton Mage. For diversity, this is one of the best skills trees in the game, and the reason why is because there's no part of the tree that you're going to look at and not want to try. You can build into 3 different types of minions other than the base mage minion. You can get yourself some cryomancers and build into cold. You can get some death knights and go melee, and you can go Cryomancers and go pure fire. Now, there are some problems within this skill tree. One of the things I feel that it lacks is that you can't really build into each type of minion to a great degree because they're all packed into one tree and this tree isn't super big. So for instance, like Cryomancers here, while there's a little confusion with the tree, for instance, it converts all poison chance gained from this tree, it's converted to ignite for Cryomancers. You get a little confused why Flame Rot would have something like poison effect and poison duration and not just go straight into ignite effect, since that's really what you want here. And your other choice, is just added health and removing mages. It kind of lacks anything else, such as added damage against ignited enemies, or flame burst, or some other sort of fire skill that synergizes with the Pyromancers themselves. You do get extra projectiles, although it's in a different area of the tree, which is another great thing, is it does have some hybrid nodes that allow for things such as extra projectiles for your ranged or extra melee area for your melee knights. So it allows you to still build in and buff your minions no matter which way you decide to go with them, or buff them at the same time if you want to have a mixture of them. The reason it did make top 5 but not a little bit higher, again, is just from the lack of being able to build into specific minions, but it is a top 5 skill in the game for how much diversity is there and how many times you're going to want to use this skill, come back to it, and play it a different way to try everything inside of it. Coming in at number 4, we have Rive, and Rive is a spectacular skill for the Sentinel. Now, one of the things that make it the best is the fact that it's a multi-staged skill, meaning it cycles through 3 different stages. You have the first strike, the second strike, and the third strike. What's nice about the skill tree is it lets you build into each of those strikes individually. For instance, you can give the second strike more hit damage, more area. You can make it pull, add a mana cost to it. The first strike you can give additional physical damage to. You can build into the third strike by giving it more hit damage, more area, more leech. You can build into Void and give this thing a lot more Void damage. You can give it attack speed. You can even make it skip strikes so that it will no longer do the third strike, or you can make it go 1-2, 1-2, then a 3 instead of just 1-2-3, 1-2-3. It has a couple of interesting mechanics, such as gaining physical damage per ignite stack that it consumes on an enemy, so it can give you a great synergy with stacking ignite on many things. One thing it doesn't super do is really synergize with other skills. It doesn't pull any other skills into it. However, on the Sentinel class, that's how almost all of the skills work. The melee skills you use are pretty individual skills that stack the same type of damage as the other skills, but not usually synergizing super well with them. Now, it does synergize with some things, such as if you are doing a minion based build with like the Forge Guard, you have the forged weapons. If you're building into the Void Knight, you have void damage, and 100% more void damage is pretty huge for the skill itself. And if you're playing Paladin, you can just get straight into all of that ignite and attack speed. So while it may not synergize so well with other skills, it synergizes with all three masteries inside of the Sentinel class. That's a huge bonus to it, and a skill that can synergize and be that synergetic with everything and the whole class as a whole, not just its mastery, is huge. And that's why this skill made number 4 on our list today. Coming in at number 3, we have Elemental Nova. Now, Elemental Nova has so many things going for it. One, it lets you control the element, which is awesome. You can choose between all 3 elements. You can play it as fire, you can play it as lightning, you can play it as ice, you can play it as a mixture of the two. You can play it as only ice fire, lightning, only lightning ice, or you can play it with all 3. You have full control over how you want to play it. And then if you want to play each one individually or as a mixture, not only do you get to choose the elements, but you can build into each one depending on how you want to do it. On top of that, it has all of the mechanics that you would want with a skill tied into it. For instance, if you want to channel it, you can. If you want to just have it as a cooldown, so it's kind of a utility skill that's used for a huge area, for like Ignite, in this case, you can have that. If you'd like to be able to target it instead of having it just around your body, you can do that. If you'd like spark charges, ice vortexes, additional damage, increased area, 100% crit, even if you just want to gain some ward, although I don't really recommend the ward nodes as they're about the only thing in it that I find useless. There is so many options for it that you're going to look at every node, you're going to read it, and you're going to at least want to try it once before finding the way that you like to play it. Its ability to let you choose the element and build into that element is great because it lets you synergize that not only with the passive tree, but with other skills of the same element. So for instance, if you wanted to build into a lightning blast build, you could do just lightning with this. If you wanted to build into ice vortex, because ice vortex can only be ice element, you can get into the ice side of Elemental Nova, and that's its way of letting you synergize in with other skills, even though it doesn't directly have any of the skills tied into its tree at all. And that makes it, in my opinion, a top 3 skill in Last Epoch currently. Coming in at the number 2 spot, we have Shift, and Shift is a universally great skill for the rogue, and it synergizes with just about anything that you could want to do. It synergizes with low life as well as high life. It synergizes with multiple skills. You can proc skills through it. You can synergize with throwing. You can synergize with bow. You can synergize with melee skills. You can even synergize with the shadow mechanic using Shift. You can increase the damage of any skill that you use next that's not channeled. You can make a skill crit guaranteed on the next hit. You can build into ailments. You can have it throw things for you. You can throw acid flash. You can throw shurikens. You can cast shadow cascade. You can build into the shadow daggers. You can have it cleanse you. There is so much that you can do with Shift and synergize it with just about any skill in the game. That is why I have it ranked as the number 2 skill, is because of how well it synergizes and thematically fits with the rogue class. Coming in the number 1 spot is Detonating Arrow. And it should be no surprise that it is a rogue class skill that takes the number 1 spot, but this skill has got everything. Now, the reason it beat out Elemental Nova is because it can do the same things and more. So for instance, you can still choose what element you want to be in. You can do lightning, you can do full fire, you can do full cold. The one thing you can't do with Elemental Nova that this skill lets you do is convert all added damage from all sources into that element type, which really lets you maximize the damage of it. It also has some interesting mechanics, such as when you embed an arrow into a target, it explodes after a time, considered an arming time, and you can both make it either instantly explode, or you can increase that amount of arming time and do other mechanics with it, such as hitting it with another arrow, giving it increased hit damage and increased explosion area. You have the lightning tendrils. You have a massive amount of different ailments that you can build into. You can build into stun, you can convert shock to poison, shock to chill, you could have your freeze. You can do shock itself and have a huge amount of shock. You can penetrate. There is really no lack of things that you can do with this skill. You can make the explosion bigger, you can make the damage bigger, make the explosion less. You can charge the skill, which is kind of like channeling, something that you can do with Elemental Nova. You can get more damage the longer that it's charged. You can increase the damage that it does based on the mana that you have consumed. Just like Elemental Nova, you can give it a cooldown with extra charges, so it's more of a utility skill than your full-time DPS skill. There's really no lack of options, and there isn't a single node inside of this tree that you're going to look at and say, I wouldn't use that. And that is why it is the #1 skill, in my opinion, in the game currently. Coming in at number 5 on the worst skills in Last Epoch is Static Orb. Now, before we begin to go into this skill, I do want to say it's not that these skills on this list are not viable at all. There are builds that are based around them, and they can complete content inside the game, but this is going to be based on just how unexciting that the skills are and how much the skill trees lack based on other skills, synergies, mechanics, and just pretty much how boring the skill itself is. So for Static Orb, some of the things that put it on this list for me were things like having to put 7 points into just one node to have a chance to double cast, and it's only a 98% chance. You don't even get a full 100% out of it. On top of that, it's 7 points. Almost half the points for the skill itself are going to be used in one node, and that is always boring. You have the same thing inside of Marrow Shards, and it's just not a lot of fun, and it's probably just better to stack 100% cast speed and be able to double cast in that manner. On top of that, while it does have some mechanics such as the charged ground and static novas along with spark charges and the ability to give you lightning aegis on cast, it really doesn't have anything outside of that. That's pretty much it. That sums up the entire tree. After that, you have an out of mana no explosion cost, which is kind of You have the ability to pull enemies and gain mana from it, but the chance is so low you'll never find yourself using it. You have a chance to gain ward, but the chance is also very low. Things like this is also the same inside of Elemental Nova Tree, where they need a huge buff. You should always be able to get ward on every hit. Let's look at Spellblade. Spellblade can get a massive amount of mana on every melee attack it does. It doesn't make sense to have a skill that's only giving you a 10% or a 25% chance to gain mana or gain ward. On top of that, outside of those few mechanics that it has, this skill tree is obviously an old skill tree from a way back because it is very small and there's nothing to build in that. It also doesn't have synergy with any other skills outside of just being a lightning skill. You cannot convert it to any other ailment, which means you can only play it with lightning skills unless you're just stacking a lot of elemental damage and playing multiple elements, which doesn't always do well for the best DPS classes. And on top of all of those things, it doesn't synergize with other skills specifically. It doesn't cast anything. It doesn't do anything for you. So, for instance, imagine how well this would be if there was an area where you could build into the final explosion, creating a black hole. Imagine if you could cast this and at the end of its duration, and it would probably add a cooldown to build into this so you couldn't have unlimited black holes. It would probably add a mana cost as well. But imagine if you could spec into it and have at its explosion area a black hole created. Imagine the synergy created from just a node like that. It should have some things in that. This skill tree is definitely in need of a rework, and that is why it's number 5 on my list of worst skills. Coming in at number 4 is Black Hole. Now for me, this skill, and I don't know about you guys, but it was just overwhelmingly disappointing. Everything about it that I tried was just disappointing. Thematically, it fits. The skill tree, everything is kind of eye-popping, catching. You kind of want to try it all. You like the freeze. You'd want to try the binary star system. You want to maximize the pull area and the pull strength. You look at Armageddon and you say, wow, that'd be really cool if that uses my meteor skill tree, but it doesn't. So it doesn't synergize with any other skills. It doesn't proc any of them for you. And just overall, it doesn't deal a lot of damage. Its mechanic of pulling mobs in is kind of hit and miss because some mobs can escape out of it if they use a movement skill, and so it can be deadly if you're not watching out for it. On top of that, it just felt overwhelmingly disappointing. As I've stated, it would be a lot cooler if there were things you could do with it, like make lightning shoot down, or for every mob that was sucked in, you had some mechanics. You actually had mechanics with it that boosted, its area, kind of like you do with devouring orbs. You get rifts, and for each successful rift hit or kill, you can increase the area of the future rifts from that skill cast. Things like that would give it some purpose, something that's just interesting and fun to play around and build into. But here you just have things that are just kind of more or less disappointing. I was, really disappointed in the binary star system that you can no longer pull enemies. So you just have two things and you try and get mobs to like go into it to even get damaged. The Armageddon, as I've stated, super disappointed that for a 200 mana cost, it doesn't even use your meteor skill tree. So in order to get this to do any damage, you have to build into fire damage, which is not something that the skill itself is. It's cold and spell and damage over time. So you're building, it just doesn't synergize well. As great as a skill as this could be, and thematically it's an awesome skill. If you've used it, you know that it's something you wish was good. Just right now, as it is, it's something that I feel needs a boost, a rework, and to synergize with skills and use your meteor skill tree, and possibly do other things such as, after sucking up, a certain amount of enemies or something, proccing Ice Blast for every enemy killed by it, or something where it shoots shards out for enemies sucked in, just something. And that is why I place it in the number 4 on my worst list of skills. Coming in at number 3, we have Soul Feast. Now this is probably a very controversial skill for a lot of people putting it on this list, but for me, this skill is just built completely wrong. Outside of its base attack, I feel like nothing in it is really built the right way. And of course, this is my personal opinion. So, for instance, the base skill, you feast on the souls of the cursed enemies, dealing necrotic damage to them, and drawing fragments of their souls back to you. Now that's very thematic, especially for the Acolyte class, and that is awesome. You can feast on up to 10 enemies at once. It prioritizes those that are closest to you. And if you guys are unaware of how this skill works, basically when you use it, all enemies basically on your screen are going to be hit by it if they're cursed, up to a maximum of 10, and like it says, it'll prioritize the ones closest to you. So the way the skill works with casting and everything is awesome. But after that, the skill tree is probably just the lamest thing I've ever seen. Way too much of it is built into this ward gain instead of actually things based around the skill tree. You have to convert it to physical and you get these blood tether chances, a very low chance. Honestly, this would be so much more exciting if you had something more like soul tethers, where you actually continue to suck the life out of your enemy until the curse that's on them ends. There are so many other mechanics in here, such as the maximum possible recast. You have this huge mana cost increase for a possibility of the skill to be recast, and that by itself, just too much RNG for a skill. You never know when it's going to proc or not. It's going to increase the mana cost hugely, which is already a problem, having a huge mana costing skill just for a chance for it to reproc. It should be something that's kind of guaranteed, kind of like you could do with Aftershocks. In Earthquake, you can get minimum aftershocks. You should be able to put into something here where you at least have a minimum possibility of recast to build into it as well, even if it increased the mana cost. One of the cool functions about it is you get this grand implant where you can have it to where it no longer requires the enemies to be cursed, but it now has a cone-shaped area. This is a great mechanic. However, one thing that I've always seen with this, there's no way to really expand outside of the cone. Like, it would be cool if you could put a cooldown on it to get rid of the cone and put it back to its normal state. In order to get more targets, you have to build into being physical, which this option should be definitely based around something that's not an element change on top of, say you want to run low life, but now you have all of this chance to gain health. Like, if you want ward, why should I have to have health coming back to me just so I can get more targets? There's a lot of problems with the skill itself, and for me, it just isn't built the right way, and that is why I put it on the number 3 spot on this list. There are just so many more interesting things that they could tie into the actual soul part of it and soul feasting, and not just tie into universal things like blood tether and ward. Coming in at number 2, we have Summon Bear. And the reason that Summon Bear makes the list here is, for me, it just has none of the qualifying qualities that a tree needs to have to be on the best list. It does not synergize well. It does not thematically really fit with the bear itself. For instance, a huge, mighty bear should be pure physical brute strength. It should not be casting a spell. Now, while it should retaliate, because obviously hitting a bear is going to create a retaliation in real life, it being a pure ailment retaliation is really weird. Why should your retaliation be a poison and bleed type thing? If it retaliates, it should retaliate with a skill, just like the Paladin and Sentinel class does with its retaliation. It just thematically and synergetically does not fit like the skill should. It is an earlier skill. It's obviously going to be reworked at some point. You can tell just by how small it is and how little options there are for it that they will obviously update it in the future. And for me, that is why it's on the number 2 list, is because it is in dire need of it. They need to add things in there for it to be able to taunt, for it to be able to fear your enemy, for it to create buffs possibly for you, for its physical presence to be known on the battlefield, and for it to be able to even synergetically synergize with your skills and use the actual swipe skill instead of just a swipe of its own every 5 seconds. And for me, that is just why it deserves to be number 2 on this list. Coming in the number 1 spot for the worst skill currently in Last Epoch, for me, is Assemble Abomination. And if it isn't for you, feel free to put down in the comments what is the worst skill in Last Epoch currently for you. But for me, the reason that Assemble Abomination is there is because it was the most hyped skill, the skill that I was the most hyped. They released it a little bit early in the forums. They let us, read what it was going to be able to do, and it created this tension of hype. And oh my gosh, you can sacrifice any type and multiple types of minions and get different types of abominations and what the abomination skills will be based on that. It created this thing where you thought there would be so much diversity and so much to go with it that it was going to be a very fun skill to build around. And then when it was released, it just was so hard to use. It's so frustrating to use. It has so many issues that really, I don't know of many people that actually use it. Now, it does have some viable builds. It is a skill that can be used, but it's just so frustrating to use. And let me explain. For instance, let's say that you build into Shattered Simulacrum, or however you pronounce that, don't even worry about that. You consume a golem, and then you get a stomp skill added to your abomination based on that. But have you ever had multiple minions out there and tried to get just the golem? It is almost freaking impossible. It is the most frustrating thing, trying to get specific minions to be the one that you're consuming, and it's very hard. Now, the reason that this skill fails for the most part, now thematically it fits. It's a perfect skill for the Acolyte. You're summoning a huge beast by sacrificing other beasts that you have. I love it. Absolutely gorgeous. I just don't think it should be a channeled skill. I think it being channeled creates it to where it's just hard to use. You have to channel it. The consuming of minions is very slow. Even if you speed it up, it's still slow. Getting the right minions, getting only the minions you want is slow. And this entire time that you're channeling and putting yourself at risk of dying, at that exact same time that's happening, you're consuming the very minions that are keeping you alive, which is just what makes it so difficult for you. Now, it would be one thing if it was something that you summoned before you ever went into battle and it lasted the whole time, but its life automatically starts degenning, which makes it almost impossible for it to last for a super long time, letting you push multiple, 5 waves in the arena, or letting you get through a whole monolith push. So it's something you're going to have to use while you're in battle, and that for me just makes it very frustrating, very difficult to use, and I don't feel like it should be a channeled skill. What I would instead like to see this skill be is not channeled. I would like to have it have a cast time. And instead of all these nodes that increase, the consumption speed, I would love to see you be able to pick and choose which minions and how many of those minions can get consumed. So for instance, some of these nodes would be that it would only consume skeleton mages, or it would add skeleton mages to the consumption list. And then a node after that will increase the amount of summoned mages that it would be allowed to cast. And this would be a cast skill. So it would be something you used. It would cast for, say, it takes 3 seconds, and in that time it's going to consume any nearby minion that fits the requirements that you picked. Now, on top of that, however many minions that you choose, the more minions, the longer the cast time. And the cast time would be cancelable. So say that I picked this minion and I wanted it to only do my skeletons, and I wanted it to do golems, and I wanted it to do a bunch of skeletons, and it increased my cast time to 5 seconds. So now when I used it, it would consume my golem, it would consume my skeletons, but it would leave my skeleton mages alone. And then when it was summoned, say it took 4 seconds to cast it, I would then get the stomp ability, and I would get the double strike ability because it did it on its own. I think it would make it a lot easier to use. I'm sure there are many more options that they could do with it, but right now it was just such a letdown for me as a skill. It's one that I would love to be able to use more. The thematic of it, the synergy of it, it has all these options. It's such a great skill, but unfortunately just the fundamental way of using it is so difficult that it deserves, in my opinion, to be the #1 worst skill in Last Epoch currently. Alright, I'm sure that was a very controversial list of top 5 and worst 5. So as I've stated, if you disagree or you think something deserved to be in one of those top spots instead of another skill, feel free to discuss it. We'll have this both in the forums on the LE website, and you can discuss it in the comments below. As always, I love the feedback and I would like to know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Sub if you haven't, plenty more content coming, and don't forget to like the video.